morning. How are you,
Hi,
Charlene?
I am good. Happy Friday, ladies.
Happy
What's your mood? What's
Friday.
your mood this morning?
My mood is relief, joy. We're here. We made it. We made it through another week. So
Good.
I'm sitting in that.
Sit
Love
in
it.
that.
Ebony,
Man,
you didn't give us yours. What's your mood forever?
I'm just like peace, definitely. Peace. That's that, like you said, number one, I gotta have that around me.
hmm
And if I gotta put that first or other
Hmm.
people definitely won't respect it. Even out of the kids, out of the hubby, out of the job,
Come on.
you gotta demand it. And so when you start leading like that, people kind of back off like, I need my space.
My piece is priceless.
My piece is
Hmm.
priceless. So
It's
thank you,
priceless.
sis, for coming on. I'm gonna have because like we've been wanting to have you on. I know we've been going back and forth, but Renita push, and I'm so glad to have you. So I'm gonna have her
Yay.
introduce
Awesome.
you.
Yes,
Thank you.
everybody. So as we know, Nielsen has tremendous insights into what's happening in media globally. And so Nielsen earlier this year prepared a report on the advertising spending going into Black media. And now for some background here, of course, we know that after the killing of George Floyd and the resulting racial justice movement in its most recent form, I should say,
hmm
there were a lot of promises, pledges to that go to Black America and that also go to Black consumers. While
hmm
we've seen an uptick in the Buy Black movement, there's also been an uptick in the Buy Black movement when it comes to advertisers buying into Black media outlets. And so Charlene is here to talk about it. Charlene Corley is the VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships at Nielsen. Welcome to Business for the Culture.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me again. Like, I'm very excited for the conversation and just really appreciate the opportunity to highlight this really important conversation.
Absolutely. So we want to start out right there at the introduction. And so what I've noticed in the data that you guys had is it shows that in 2021, 20 of the top advertisers pledged between 2 and 5% of their ad spend would go with Black owned media. This was
hmm
last year now, right? So
Yes.
my first question, the biggest question probably is, have those pledges been realized yet?
So that I'm not sure of. We do have upfront season coming up next month, I think. And so we're all hopeful that in that season of like buying and transacting for the next television season, that's where a lot of this is really going to take place. We know there have been a lot of really big commitments and announcements, Target, and Revolt, and like all these great partnerships that have been coming up. But I haven't seen anybody like lay all the cards out on the table just yet on how all of that is shaking up. I would say there's still a lot of owners who are, from the feedback that we've gotten, waiting to see, that really take place. And there are some who are, now saying, I'm getting calls all the time. We're building conversations, like this is really happening. And part of, the report that you mentioned, part of the urgency that we felt at Nielsen was, one, get our own house in order, because our data was not built to report by ownership type. It
Hmm.
wasn't built to say, oh, these are all the Black owned networks. Let's report
Oh
them like
wow.
that. Like that was never a
Okay.
consideration anybody ever had.
Wow.
So then we had to go and build that.
Hmm.
Same for Hispanic and Asian owned and Native American owned media. We started looking at who we capture today and who has that diverse ownership, and could we aggregate and really start to show the power and the missed opportunity by not
Hmm.
doing business with these folks. And so our hope with that report was to just really underscore the urgency. And again, if you're saying like, hey, we want a relationship with Black America, but Black owned media reaches 27% of that population and you don't do business with them, that's a
Hmm.
big missing link.
You know what I want to dig into? The report highlighted the unique ability to influence and
Come on.
drive culture that Black folks have always had. We've known for years that Black folks have been culture creators, right? So, how heavily weighed was that when conducting this study, and how will it lead advertisers going forward?
Yeah, it's important for me to always acknowledge, especially as an African American, to acknowledge that these companies didn't just all of a sudden appear in, July 2020, that, our value isn't just all of a sudden here today and like now we're influencing things. From the founding of this nation, our culture has influenced the literal foundations, but also, the vibe, the culture, the art, the music, everything, that we love and value has got some of our magic in it, right? But I think the point that was being made earlier, we have not always been compensated for that. And let's talk about, not just traditional media, but Black creators online, journalists, trendsetters, where, cornrow's been around for however, millennia.
Come on,
but,
keep going.
They get on the right model and all of a sudden it's a different kind of trend, right? Mm-hmm. And people aren't going for that anymore. It can be really damaging to brands. And I would say that there's just the access that folks have to discover, again, like Black owned brands or other upstarts to replace someone, it's just too easy. So mistakes really carry a long-term impact right now. And it was critical that we acknowledge, this kind of influence, especially on the media industry, has been here. And, again, if you're trying to reach the community or target the community, because we know if you get us, we're going to put you on, right? If it clicks, there's just some untapped value in that. And it's time to circulate, that some of that equity in the community.
I want to also kind of, piggyback off of that, because when we begin to put pressure on these corporations to also do that, tied to that is also equity, diversity, and inclusion on their boards, right? So there was a report, I believe it's from Statistica, in 2020, African Americans made up, and I was surprised it was this high actually, 10% of boards on 200 media companies in the US. And I'm gonna give you a small personal glimpse of my journey. I was at a station once and interviewing for a position, and it was it catered to an urban audience. The management was a white male. And I wanted to bring a little bit more meat to the little bit of news that I did for them. And when I did, the pushback I got was, I know what from the white man.
Yeah.
I know what Black women want. I've been in this industry.
Bless your heart.
So you're sitting across from a Black woman and you tell me you know what Black women want. There's no joke. Huge person in the industry. Won't say the name. But that happens often.
All the time. Again, it is so past time to change perceptions. But again, had that same conversation about, we haven't changed a thing. We know exactly what Black women want to see on TV. I was like, really? Because target market right here. And
right in front of you.
So I think that just kind of like diversifying your table and not just having a person present. Because like I said, you were hired, you were in there, you were coming to bring in your new ideas, but listening and actually receiving what we bring to the table, that's the part.
Right.
It's not just checking a box. It's actually, having that environment where we can be heard, we can be seen, we can bring that authenticity. All of that has a place in this conversation.
I wanted to ask you something that you and I talked about before for the Black Business Beat. Now, you talked about how nuanced the conversation around these data were, and how, the people the advertisers, they were looking for data to be able to spend money, and then just run us down why that was so important. Because I thought the way that you put it was really clear.
Great. Yeah. So when we go back to sort of this perfect example of chicken and the egg, right? Which comes first? So the advertisers are saying, hey, where's your Nielsen data before I can do business with you? And the owners are saying, well, hey, I need some investment so I can go and invest in, building all the things that measurement requires. I can't do that without the investment. So we're at a stalemate, right? But again, seeing these commitments being made, seeing this really historic moment, like that can't be the excuse. So if Nielsen is anyway a blockade to y'all coming together, we said, let's go back in and look at our data. Is there a way that we can aggregate this? Because there's also some considerations, some sensitivity around, if you're an owner and you've never seen your Nielsen data, we don't want to out that, for lack of a better term, without you having the time to like really understand what this means, understand the impacts. But there are certain steps that Nielsen can do proactively on our side that gives a broad sense. It's not going to be the granular like program or ad level measurement, but it'll give you a broad sense of like time period performance. And we can proactively turn that on in a lot of cases. There are some costs associated with that. But again, our leadership was like, this moment is important enough, let's do it. And so we use that to basically make these aggregates so that we could say, on average, Black-owned radio is reaching almost 12 million people a week. Not just Black people, everybody in this country. And so again, if you're not doing business with Black radio, you're missing 7% of radio listeners every single week. And who can, you know, depending on what, especially if you're trying to reach the Black listener, Black community, who can afford to miss that? And so we were finding all these great examples that just underscore, even at an aggregate level, the power of what's at stake, you know, the power of the reach for these owners. And hopefully we were like, hopefully this can be enough to start a conversation, both for an owner who may not be Nielsen measured yet, who may not ever want to be Nielsen measured, but can go in and start a conversation and hopefully get a deal done this year that might be able to transform their business. And that was really the goal behind what we were trying to do.
I want to kind of have you tap into this a little bit, because I don't think people really understand even the power of like traditional radio. Digital is huge, but even for the African American community, we all often repeat things, but it doesn't always apply to us. So people often say radio is dead, radio is dead.
Yeah.
But I really want people to understand what percentage of African American audiences still get their news, information, entertainment from traditional radio.
Yeah, it is significant. And I was just trying to think of the number that Black-owned radio, I think, reached over 6 million Black listeners every single week. And radio in general, again, is still one of the highest ways to reach the, you know, Black audiences in the country. And so broadly, yes, you will hear that radio is dead. When it comes to communities of color, absolutely not. When it comes to the Black community, every time you go to like, you know, the function or whatever, you know, the community fair, your local radio station is there. If it's breaking news and you're on your, you know, evening commute, you're going to turn on your local station. And if you get a little older and nerdy like me, you know, you're always tuned to NPR in the car.
Or Bloomberg Radio.
Or
Bloomberg.
No,
Let's give like.
So actually, yes, because I actually have satellite radio in the car. So yes, Bloomberg Radio is
Sirius XM channel 119.
Come on now. Talk about it.
It's these
this brilliant Black woman.
Okay, come on now, you got to support. But yeah, it goes back to like sometimes these bigger narratives really take hold. And what I love about the opportunity of working with Nielsen and, you know, the sort of the benefit of measuring real people's behavior is no. So especially like when you crack open a certain community, it just has a different value, you know, it has a different relationship with that community. And it's part of why, again, if you don't have this certain segment in your consideration set, in your media plan, you might be missing out. And so that's a great part of my job and the work we do on the DE&I team is to find exactly that. Like the big takeaway headline might be radio is dead. When you get into the Black community and our data, we're not seeing that.
Well, that kind of speaks to a little bit more about what you were saying. Now, we have data and we had a really good explainer about that, but it's not just about the numbers. There are important qualitative stories,
yes,
right, behind some of these Black media outlets that require and or maybe some would like to say demand more eyes, more advertisement from large advertisers. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because especially in this day and age, you know, the media landscape is so fragmented, right? There's, you know, at every turn, there's all kinds of options. And so we know that especially in traditional media, you know, television or radio, it is going to take longer to build an audience. It's a long-term play, right? And so bigger is not always what you're going to get when you reach out to some of these owners. However, quantity and quality here aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So part of what we knew we had to do was like, every time you go to an owner, it's not going to be like, we're number one. That's not always going to be the story. That may not ever be the story. But who we do have, we have a really special connection and relationship with. Who we do have is in the market for your product. Who we do have trust us to bring us advertisers who they can go then and find at their local store. And so making sure we can empower people to really know, understand, and show the value of the audience they do have is really important to us, because, it is really, really hard to, especially as people are cutting costs. That means you may not have, as large of a cable package or something, it's a little bit more difficult to build that up. It takes time. And so, the commitment to kind of walk with people as they build their audience, as they build, their value proposition, Qualitative plays a huge part in that. So we wanted to show income levels, or, the number of folks who are going to be shopping around for a new insurance provider, or interested in financial services, or, willing to switch brands based on reputation. Those kinds of qualitative pieces hopefully help empower diverse owners to step into the room and say, if you're just looking for the biggest reach, that may not necessarily be us. But if you're looking for consumers who are ready for a new brand, that is us. And so we wanted to give those talking points as well.
I'm curious, those who are in the chat, if you have any questions, and how many listen to know your local personalities or support Black Red. I'm curious, like, shout them out too. Look, call them out. We'll say their name. But how many even support Black owned media? How many of you have businesses that you advertise on Black owned media? Make sure that you're not forgetting about that when you're trying to figure out how to push, how to advertise, or what to do with your business. It's important to do that. I'm curious about, what can people do? So people are hearing this information for the first time and they're like, wow, I want to kind of put a demand on this information. What are some steps that they can take personally in pushing advertisers to do this?
Yeah, I think the more that audiences understand, what is the, I guess, current landscape of Black-owned media in the traditional spaces, which is where we started with our report, television and radio primarily, at the national level, there's really not a lot. We're talking a couple of dozen traditional networks that have Black ownership. And that was more than a lot of the other groups that we looked at,
It's like 168 or somewhere around that's Black owned networks.
So we, in the ones that we looked at for like traditional cable, the ones that have a certification, there really wasn't a lot. So that was how we had to narrow down for our report, because that is where these advertisers are looking to make the spend. It's like, who's certified, right? The other part, to your point about what we want to do with this initiative, is also help people get reimbursed for being certified Black owned. And so that's another part of what we're doing. And that fund is available through NMSDC. But I think what the average viewer can do is get familiar with, who's Black owned in your area and available to you. Luckily, the power of the internet, you can connect to all kinds of folks through the digital and social space. And I would say, if you're, whatever you have access to on television, find out what, in the local sense, there are a ton of local stations, radio and television, that have diverse ownership, and find out who they are, give them a listen or a watch, and make, and support them in that way. And I think that does help when they go to make the case for increased dollars, but getting familiar with who's an owner in your area for sure. And
if they're really Black owned, because there are a lot of companies that people think are Black owned and they are not Black owned.
Right. And so, again, that goes back to the certification piece, where we were like, get your credentials, because there's a lot of vetting that happens through getting that certification. That goes for any business owners you have in your audience as well. It is involved. It is an investment, but it is worth it based on that stamp of approval, and it opens a lot of doors. So yeah, we highly recommend that.
Something that it's probably not considered in this report, but that I really can't skip over is the opportunity that a lot of young Black journalists get at their local Black news station.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
My first gig on the radio was with WVON in Chicago. And that was over 10 years ago. And so it's kind of cool that the report that I do now for Bloomberg, the Black Business Beat, is played on VON in Chicago. So it's
Yeah.
a full circle moment. But I never, would have gotten half of the opportunities I got in Chicago without that first chance that someone took on me there. So there's got to be some sort of value attached to that too. May not be directly, but I'm sure it has not a lot to do with ad spend, but I just can't not mention that, because a lot of my friends around the country who are journalists, Black journalists from Chicago, we all got our start there.
And you talk about going full circle. That brings us exactly to how you began. When the reason why we are talking about this and it hasn't faded away is because after the murder of George Floyd, people wanted equity, social justice, community change, real investment in community. And you cannot have that conversation, especially for Black people, without talking about Black-owned media, without talking about HBCUs, because again, they're reaching into the community and finding talent and giving them a springboard to now have a journalism career. They're reaching in and finding talent and putting them behind a camera, and now they're an engineer at a network. Like, that's what we're talking about when we talk about community impact. It just hits different when you're talking about these businesses who maybe don't have the bias set that you ran into at another station, where you can come in and not just be a part of the team, but like a real contributor with your authenticity and have a mentor that's going to help coach you into, sitting at Bloomberg. Do you know what I mean? And so now that influence has gone across the media industry, and that doesn't always happen at every single company. I can't say it never happens because Nielsen obviously isn't Black owned, but I've had a 13-year career here where they poured into me. But I think it's different, like you said, with local is inherently community, right? And so with Black-owned media, especially at that local level, they're just doing something that really impacts at a personal level. And so I love that you brought that up, because that's the full circle. That's why we're talking about them after what happened in 2020. It's just such a unique opportunity to really change lives and legacies.
I mean, I think of even one of the, someone in the chat put in HUR, which is on the campus of Howard University, right?
That's right.
So talk about where people get their start.
Yeah.
It is important that we support even stations like that, because it does give them, for African Americans, we know how challenging it can be to even get in this industry.
Right.
Very challenging to get in this industry. So when you have stations, radio stations or digital stations on college campuses, that can be a huge gateway to get into the career you want, while also being supported by ad revenues from whether it be Black companies or white companies. So it's important to see kind of like that chain of how that also fosters opportunities for the community, like you said.
100%. And they're a great example.
Wow.
Sounds good. I think a lot of people in the comments agree with you, Charlene, that I just wanted to say a lot of people agree with you. And I would like to hear more people shout out their local Black-owned radio TV station. And do you listen to it, and do you conduct business with them, just like Ebony asked?
Yeah, well, I'm in the DMV, so definitely WHUR plays a big part. But since I'm a FAMU, and shout out to 90.5.
Okay, FAMU.
So that was definitely the go-to back in the days in Tallahassee. But yeah, it really is. I think again, for folks who, it's just about awareness sometimes, especially if you think about the younger generation that may not be exposed to things in the way that maybe I was, not to put anybody else's age out there, but just building that awareness of like, oh my gosh, there's a Black-owned radio station, let me tune into that. Let me stream it on their website or whatever. But yeah, I think there's just building that awareness of who's up and coming. I see some rattlers in the chat. Hey y'all. I think that that's something that we can do to help support the community as well.
Where can people go to see the report for those who haven't and want to peruse through it, I think
Mhm.
it's something that they should read.
Yeah.
People go, and how can people follow you?
Sure. Well, first of all, Nielsen does a lot of free data. So Nielsen.com, I think /insights is a great resource to go for anybody looking for, trends and information on all the measurement and insight that we are working on. And so Nielsen.com is also the place where you'll find our diverse owned media report that came out in February.
Mhm.
I think I have a friend of Nielsen in the chat that maybe can put the link in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, Nielsen.com for all of the work that we're doing. You normally find a couple, 3 or 4 big reports from us every year, and this is one of them. But in the meantime, there's all kinds of articles and insights and webinars that we're doing, and most of it at 99% of it at no cost. So if you ever need a source, I love telling people and students especially about that. And for following me, you can follow me at Rising Shar on Instagram. You can follow Nielsen on at Nielsen Media on Instagram, and Shar Speaks One on Twitter.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
This
Thank
has
you
been
so
great.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This definitely helped make my Friday off to a good start, so I appreciate it.
What's your mood? I need to know your mood one more time. Look.
My new mood one more time. I'm still just so relieved that it's Friday, and I'm like, we made it, y'all. Like, it has been a week.
Thank you so much
Just
for
really
coming on.
hopeful, and
Thank you, Charlene.
Y'all take care.
You
All
too.
right.
Enjoy your weekend.
You too.